Good evening, everybody. My name is Brianna Bergamini. So I know a lot of people in this room. For those of you that don't know me, I'll go ahead and give you a brief introduction. So I graduated from Wingate University in 2022 with an environmental biology degree, but a lot of my upper level classes were focused on botany and plant ecology. I've always had a passion for plants. And then in my senior year, 2022, was the first time that students were offered an opportunity to do an internship out here at Southern Eights. I hopped on that opportunity and had a wonderful time, and I was offered the position here as Prairie Keeper, and now that's what I do. So a lot of people have touched on prairies, and a lot of people in here probably know what a prairie is, but for those of you that don't, you're probably thinking of something like this, or maybe even this. But here in the Southeast, we actually have something a little bit different. So our prairies in the Southeast look a lot different than those of the Great Plains or Midwest. They look a little bit more like this. And we actually have more different types of prairies here in the Southeast than that of the Midwest or Great Plains, which are mostly tall grass prairies. And historically, prairies have been documented here in the Piedmont region since as early as 1540, when the first European explorers came through. So the first European explorers that came through were from Spain. It was Hernando de Soto and 600 men, and they came down here and they went through the Carolina Piedmont area right here, and they wrote about the vast prairies and savannas that they saw, and these accounts can still be followed up to like 1740s. So historically, they've been a part of this landscape. So why care about that? Great question. Thank you for asking. And so as I mentioned, historically they've always been here, and if the goal is to restore the land back to what it naturally was, then prairies are a big part of that. In terms of them as an ecosystem themselves, they have some pretty important things happening. So the plants themselves, so of the 6,000 native plants, roughly 6,000 native plants in the Southeast, I believe it's 60% of them require or prefer grassland habitats. And 2/3 of our rare or endangered plant species actually require or prefer grassland habitats. So it's not only that there's a diversity of plants out there, it's the quality of plants in them. So in turn, these plants stabilize the soil, and the root systems go way deep. So if you look at a root of a native grass versus your fescue turf grasses, the roots of a native grasses can reach 10 feet underground, which is insane for soil stabilization. Some of your turf grasses, couple inches. So we're talking feet difference in the root systems here, which in turn helps topsoil runoff, so you don't get as much runoff happening or erosion, which improves water quality. And air quality is also improved with our prairies, because 1 acre of prairie can hold 1 ton of carbon a year. So if you think about that, here at Southern Eights, we have over 100 acres of restored prairies. That's 100 tons of carbon every year that's being stored in these prairies. And it's not just in the above ground vegetation, it's under the ground, so when these are burned, it's not re-released, it's still stored in their roots underground. And they're extremely important habitats for vertebrates and invertebrates, so 2/3 of the native vertebrates in the Southeast actually require or prefer grasslands at some point during their life cycle. And one of the most popular groups would be our grassland bird species. There's some beautiful birds. Our quail and our meadowlarks are 2 examples of our grassland bird species we have here at Southern Eights, and in general, grassland bird species have decreased 34% since 1970, and that has a lot to do with their habitats being reduced, because our native prairies, as James mentioned earlier, have reduced by over 90% since the Europeans have arrived 200 years ago. And invertebrates, it's a great pollinator habitat. So if you like to eat food, which I know I do, you have to think a pollinator. So 1 out of every 3 bites of food actually a pollinator is responsible for. And in recent years, a lot of pollinators have been declining. One example of that would be the American bumblebee. Great, cute little bumblebee. Honeybee gets all the rep, but we have this native American bumblebee who has declined by over 90% in the past few years. And it's actually a threatened species in much of South Carolina and North Carolina. But if you look at Chesterfield County, it's only at risk. And I would like to think that our prairies have a little something to do with that. So, as I mentioned, the Southeast has more different types of prairies than the Midwest or Great Plains combined, and Southern Eights is a great example of that. So all of the areas that are outlined in blue are our prairies. The ones that have the red dot have been planted with our native seed mix, and the ones without the red dot have been left successional, and we study those plant populations as they are. But they're all different parts of the property. So we have some in floodplains, we have some at higher elevations on top of hills, we have some in pine stands, some are open fields, some are in hardwoods. So it's just a good example of how diverse these ecosystems can be. Okay, so right here is where you're located, and today I'm going to be talking about a specific prairie located up in Fireworks, which Nathan was talking about earlier, where he was showing you all this awesome katydid sounds. That's the Fireworks area, and I'll be talking about that as well. So one of the ways that I track the prairies is drone photos. I can take aerial photos and I can do it at the quadrat level. This is a picture of Fireworks East Prairie during its peak, which I would love. If anybody is available in June and wants to come out to see our prairies and during their peak season, it's absolutely outstanding. All this yellow that you see here, black-eyed Susan is the dominant plant during this time. And here's a little up close. So this is our wild quinine here. You can see a purple coneflower and our black-eyed Susans. So that's during peak season, which I could talk about for hours, but for the purpose of today's presentation, I'm going to focus on the last 3 months when the interns were out here. So this is a brief timeline of that between September and the beginning of November. So this one was taken last week. Here we go. So this is the beginning of September. End of September, October, November. And I only have one for November because it's not the end of November yet, so bear with me on that. So, and this is a loop back just so you can see like how big of a change it was in just 3 months. So this is September again, and that's the end of November. So. Big change. So I wanted to go ahead and quickly break down each month. So this is September. Some of the stuff that you're going to see out here in September would be your thoroughworts are in flower, your goldenrod's starting to put buds out. Some of it's in flower, not all of it. We've got our camphor weeds coming up. Our silphium is dominant at the beginning of September. Towards the end of September, it starts to die out, but there are still a few out there, so I wanted to include that for you. The grasses are present, so the Indian grass and the blue stem grass that James mentioned earlier. And then this one in the corner is a new plant that I found out here this year called sumptweed. And some of the insects that you can find out here in September, because it's still pretty active, you can still see butterflies, grasshoppers, caterpillars, and even your late season monarchs are still flying through. And there's a lot of bird activity. So our flycatchers really enjoy our Fireworks prairies because they can just get insects all day long. It's real easy for them. So this is October. So in October, our goldenrod by now is in full flower. Not many have buds. They're all in flower. And our grasses are now starting to grow taller and put out their flower heads for the season. Our thoroughworts are now in seed. And our Indian grass is releasing pollen. Our camphor weed, the little yellow flowers, are in full bloom. And some of them have even started to start to produce seeds. And our ground cell bush has got its buds on it, which is our dominant flowering plant in the late season. So some of the animal life that you can see during October, there's still some butterflies hanging around, but not many. They kind of move on by this point. The spiders take over. So the orb weavers come creeping in, including garden spiders, and deer activity starts to pick up. So there's always deer activity in the prairies, but once it starts getting towards mating season, you can really start to see the scat around the edges, the deer rubs around the edges, and things like that. And our quail are now starting to form coveys. So as you're walking through the prairie, they burst up a lot and they're in large groups. So by now, November, if you walked out to the prairie tonight and we had a flashlight and I could show you some plants, this is what you would see. You'd see a lot of goldenrod in seed. Our blue stem grasses are dominant right now, and they are also releasing seeds, as well as our Indian grass. And dog fennel is in flower, which a lot of people don't really know. Dog fennel does flower. It's just not very showy. And then our groundsel bush right here in this fluffy guy right here is our dominant flowering plant in the prairie at this point. And you walk up to one of these plants, it's going to be full of bees. And then this one right here is that sumptweed from the beginning. It's now kind of done for the season. In terms of wildlife, the spiders are still out there, just not as many. And there is a lot of tiger moths out, I've noticed. And there's these right here, everyone knows these guys. These are woolly bears. So fun fact about the woolly bears, which I've been seeing a lot of in the prairies, and they've all been with the band in the middle. So legend has it that if the woolly bears are all black, then the winter is going to be really harsh. But if they have this red band in the middle, then the winter is going to be pretty mild. So I've been seeing the ones with the red band, guys, so I think we're good. And this is a timeline of the flowers, so I know I just said a bunch of plants at you at one time, so we'll go over it real quickly. So at the beginning of September, it's our rosinweed that's dominant. It moves to our thoroughworts, which makes way for camphorweed and goldenrod, and then to our grasses, which start to take over the dominance of the prairie. So we've got our Indian grass, blue stem grass, and then we've got our dog fennel and groundsel bush near the end of October, beginning of November. So in addition to all of that awesome stuff happening in the prairies, he mentioned we also had a woodland transect. So we also got to see some things outside of the prairies, and they got to experience the main event of fall, I would like to think, which are all the different fall fruits that come about. So here are some different types of fruits that they got to see. So they got to see berries. So we've got persimmon berries and American beauty berries. They got to see drupes. So they're called American holly berries, but botanically speaking, it's a drupe, which just means it's got this hard center. Cherry is a great example. A lot of achenes around out in the prairies. So we've got our goldenrod and our blue stems, which are releasing achenes, little fluffy seeds. They got to see our milkweed follicles closed, open, and then fully released. So that was like a full circle for them that they got to see, as well as some legumes. They also got to see soybeans, but I'm not counting that because it's not natural. And then nuts as well, so a lot of acorns coming up at this point in the season. And capsule, so the sweet gum is technically a capsule. For today's presentation, I'm going to say it's a capsule. And then in addition to that, they got to see and learn a little bit more about the actual restoration process of the prairies. So this season, we had a lot of logging operations going on in our pine stands. So we try to thin out these pines to make room for the hardwood trees that should be here. And the goal is with these leftover logging decks to restore them back into native prairies. And they got to go see the aftermath, if you will, of a logging operation. They also got to learn a little bit about technology. As David mentioned, it's a big part of the Carolina Wildlands Foundation, so they did get to learn how to fly the drone one day, and everybody got a chance to fly it around if they chose. And they got a chance to use a stop-action camera. And this one's sitting over Fireworks Pond. So I'd like to give a special thank you to Camden, James, and Alex for spending every Friday out in the prairie with me. I appreciate sharing something I'm so passionate about with other people. And thank you everybody for listening to me talk today. And if anybody wants to track the prairies with me each month, I post monthly updates on our website. So please check that out. Thank you.